Carl McKinley was in the offices of the News and Courier on Broad Street in Charleston, working on the next morning's edition, when he heard a sound he first took for a heavy wagon rolling somewhere in the building. He wrote later that the roll deepened and spread into a roar that seemed to come from the earth and the air at the same time. Then the building began to move. He and the other men got up and went for the door, and stopped just short of it, weighing whether it was worse to die under the ceiling inside or under a falling wall in the street. That was the argument in his head while the ground shook. Charleston, South Carolina, a place with no volcano, no fault anyone could name, no reason on any map to be doing what it was doing. Almost every large earthquake happens at the edge of a tectonic plate, where two of them grind past each other. The San Andreas, the subduction zones off Japan and Alaska, all of them sit on a boundary. Charleston is not near an edge. It sits in the middle of the North American plate, on a passive coastline, on ground that is supposed to be geologically quiet. On the night of August 31st, 1886, that ground produced an earthquake estimated at magnitude 6.9 to 7.3. There is no exact figure, because there was no instrument in the country that recorded it. The number comes from later work, from mapping how hard the shaking was in each town, and from reading the size backward from the damage. It was felt over most of the eastern half of the continent. People felt it in Chicago, in Milwaukee, in Boston. It was felt in Cuba and in Bermuda, out across the water. A single shock in the supposedly stable interior of the plate reached about 2.5 million square miles. Charleston was a city of about 50,000 people, built mostly of brick and soft mortar, much of it standing since before the Civil War. It was the kind of construction that holds up a building for a century and then comes apart all at once when the ground moves sideways. The strong shaking lasted somewhere under a minute. In that time, chimneys came off almost every house in the city. The decorative porches Charleston is known for, the tiered piazzas, pulled away from their walls and dropped into the yards. Whole facades fell into the streets. People ran outside and would not go back in. They spent that night and many nights after in the parks and the squares and the open ground of the city, sleeping in the open while the aftershocks kept coming, and they kept coming for weeks. Fires broke out where lamps and stoves had overturned and where gas lines had snapped. The city's water mains had broken in the same shaking, so there was little pressure to fight them with, and several of the fires burned largely unchecked. That the city did not burn down entirely was closer to luck than to control. Almost every building in Charleston was damaged. The dollar figure came to 5 or 6 million in 1886 money, in a single southern city that had not yet recovered from the war. The city took the famous damage, but the ground moved hardest somewhere else, inland, about 20 to 25 kilometers northwest, around the village of Somerville and Middleton Place, in what is now called the Middleton Place-Somerville Seismic Zone. Out there, in the fields, the ground did something people struggle to describe, even when they have seen it. Water and sand came up through the surface under pressure, through vents a few feet across. The shaking had turned wet, sandy soil into something that behaved like a liquid, and that liquid found its way up and burst out at the top. They are called sand blows. The vents left craterlets in the fields, some of them more than 20 feet across, ringed with pale sand and blue mud that had come up from well below the topsoil. Some of those pale ovals are still legible in the Lowcountry soil, visible from the air, more than a century later. The ground kept the record, even after the towns forgot it. The South Carolina Railway ran through this zone, and its track did not survive straight. The rails were bent and buckled where the roadbed moved under them. Recent work, going back to relic photographs of the line, reads a lateral shift of several meters in the track near Somerville, and about a meter of uplift. That is the ground itself moving, measured in the one straight man-made line that happened to be lying across it. The number of dead is usually given as about 60. That is the figure from the days right after, and it is almost certainly low. People kept dying in the weeks that followed, from injuries and from the exposure of sleeping outdoors through a Lowcountry September, and those deaths were counted unevenly or not at all. Many of the dead were Black residents of Charleston and the surrounding country, and in the South in 1886, those lives were not recorded with the same care. Estimates that try to include the later and the uncounted run to around 110, so the honest range is roughly 60 to 110. The count was never firm, and it never will be. The uncertainty is not only about the earthquake, it is about who was doing the counting and who they thought was worth counting. There were no seismographs to consult, so the United States Geological Survey did the next thing. It sent people to ask. Investigators gathered accounts from across the whole felt area, town by town, and graded the shaking at each one, from mild swaying to buildings coming down. Clarence Dutton of the United States Geological Survey compiled the fieldwork into a report published in 1889, several hundred pages of it, with maps drawing rings of equal shaking outward from the Lowcountry. Those rings are how the magnitude gets estimated. You cannot weigh an earthquake that no instrument felt, but you can map how far and how hard it was felt, and reason back to the energy it must have taken. The Dutton report is why we can say anything precise about an event that happened before the tools to measure it existed. It is one of the first modern earthquake surveys done anywhere in the United States, and it exists because the earthquake was strange enough that the government wanted to understand it. Then, slowly, the understanding stopped being passed on. The question the specialists still argue about is the one a person standing in those fields in 1886 would have asked first. Why here? The leading idea goes back a long way to when the supercontinent Pangaea broke apart and the Atlantic began to open a couple of 100 million years ago. That breakup left deep faults in the crust under the eastern seaboard. They have been quiet for a very long time, but the whole plate is under slow, steady stress as it moves, and an old fault that is oriented the right way to that stress can slip again, long after everyone has stopped thinking of it as a fault. That is the leading explanation, not a settled one. Despite decades of drilling, mapping, and survey work, there is still no agreement on exactly which fault moved in 1886. Several candidates under the Lowcountry are long enough and oriented well enough to have done it. None has been confirmed as the one. This is the part that unsettles the people who study it. A plate boundary tells you where to expect the next one. A buried, unnamed intraplate fault tells you almost nothing about when it will move again, only that it has moved before and that the zone under Somerville is still faintly active today. Charleston, rebuilt. If you walk the old streets now, you can find the evidence if you know to look for it. The iron bolts and washer plates set into the brick facades. Earthquake bolts run through the houses on long rods to tie the walls back together. Most people walk past them as decoration. The memory faded within a couple of generations. The earthquake became a local story, a date on a plaque, a thing that happened once. And because it became a story instead of a hazard, the building did not change to account for it. The East Coast builds for wind. The codes and the habits are shaped around hurricanes, which come every year and which everyone believes in. They are not shaped around a magnitude 7 from a fault nobody can name, which came once and recorded history and left. The same source zone is still there under the Lowcountry. The building on top of it is not built for what it did in 1886. That is stated here as record, not as warning. The ground has done this once. Whether it does it again on a human timescale or a geological one is exactly the thing nobody can tell you. McKinley finished his account of that night, and it ran in the paper because the paper came out anyway. He wrote about the relief of the stillness when the roaring finally stopped. And he did not know, because nobody could have known, that the stillness would last long enough for the whole country to forget the noise. The craterlets are still out there in the fields, where the earth turned to liquid for a minute and pushed itself up into the light. They are quieter now, and harder to see, and they are the clearest thing anyone left behind. The land kept the record. The people misplaced it. There is another one on screen about the new Madrid shocks in the Mississippi Valley. The other great earthquake, the middle of the country has already forgotten.